She vanished into the forest, but he never stopped searching. A tale of love, magic, and destiny. There was a time when the world was gentler, cloaked in the quiet hum of ancient magic that lingered beneath the surface, unseen but deeply felt. It whispered through the rustling leaves, danced with the ripples of the river, and hung in the air like a forgotten melody. And in the heart of a small, mist-shrouded village, nestled at the edge of a vast forest, two children once roamed, tethered by a bond as old as the mountains that loomed beyond. The boy's name was Jiwoon, and the girl was Seorin. They were inseparable from the moment they first met, two wandering souls who seemed to recognize something in each other that no one else could see. Jiwoon, with his bright, curious eyes and quiet strength, was always a step ahead, pulling Seorin along as they raced through the meadows and climbed the gnarled trees at the forest's edge. Seorin, gentle and fearless in her own way, followed him without hesitation, her laughter a soft echo that seemed to blend with the wind. The villagers often spoke in hushed tones about the forest, warning the children to stay away. It was said to be the realm of forgotten gods, a place where time tangled and reality blurred. But Jiwoon and Seorin, drawn by something they couldn't name, ventured deeper than anyone dared. In the heart of the forest, they found a glade where the air shimmered with an otherworldly light. It was their secret place, a sanctuary untouched by time, where the world seemed to hold its breath. The glade was unlike anything they had ever seen. Ancient, towering trees circled the clearing, their twisted roots weaving intricate patterns through the earth. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and a crystal-clear stream wound its way through the moss-covered stones. Above them, the sky seemed closer, as if the heavens themselves leaned down to watch over this sacred space. Here, in this hidden realm, Jiwoon and Seorin found a kind of magic that had nothing to do with spells or incantations. It was the magic of belonging, of being exactly where they were meant to be. Their days were filled with adventure. They built forts from fallen branches, chased fireflies through the twilight, and told stories about the ancient gods who were said to slumber beneath the forest floor. Sometimes they would lie on their backs in the grass, watching the clouds drift by and imagining all the places they would one day explore. But no matter how far their dreams took them, they always returned to the glade, to the place where their hearts felt most at home. As the seasons changed, so did Jiwoon and Seorin. They grew taller, their laughter deepening as they began to understand the world in new ways. But even as they aged, there was something timeless about their bond, something that seemed to defy the passing years. They moved through the forest with the ease of those who belonged, their footsteps light and sure as they followed paths that only they could see. One summer afternoon, as the sun bathed the glade in golden light, Jiwoon and Seorin discovered something strange. Hidden beneath a tangle of roots near the stream was an old, weathered chest. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and shimmer in the sunlight. With a mix of curiosity and trepidation, they pried it open, revealing a collection of ancient artifacts, a tarnished silver pendant, a dagger with a hilt shaped like a dragon's claw, and a scroll written in a language neither of them could read. They didn't know it then, but opening that chest would change everything. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. The forest, which had always been a place of comfort and wonder, grew darker and more mysterious. Shadows stretched longer, and the air grew thick with the scent of rain, even when the sky was clear. Animals that had once been friendly and curious now watched them with wary eyes, and the once gentle rustling of the leaves began to sound like whispers, urgent, fearful whispers that spoke of danger and change. Jiwoon and Seorin, undeterred by the growing unease, continued to explore. They spent hours poring over the scroll, tracing the unfamiliar symbols with their fingers and trying to decipher their meaning. It wasn't until one moonlit night, as they sat by the stream, that Seorin noticed something strange about the pendant. When she held it up to the light, the silver surface seemed to glow, and for a brief moment she thought she saw a figure, a woman with long, flowing hair and eyes like the night sky, gazing back at her. That night, Seorin dreamed of the forest. In her dream, she stood at the edge of the glade, watching as the trees bent and twisted, their branches reaching toward her like grasping hands. A voice called to her from the shadows, a voice that was both familiar and strange. It whispered her name over and over, until she woke with a start, her heart racing and her skin cold with sweat. She didn't tell Jiwoon about the dream, but the next day, as they wandered through the forest, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension, and even the birds seemed to have fallen silent. It wasn't until they reached the glade that Seorin realized what was wrong. The shimmering light that had once filled the clearing was gone, replaced by a dull, grayish haze. The flowers had withered, and the stream, which had always been clear and bright, now ran dark and sluggish. Jiwoon stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern, but before he could speak, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low rumbling sound filled the air, and from the shadows at the edge of the glade, a figure emerged. It was a woman, tall and regal, with hair that flowed like liquid silver, and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. She wore a cloak of midnight blue, embroidered with stars, and as she stepped into the clearing, the air seemed to ripple around her, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to her will. Jiwoon and Seorin stood frozen, their hearts pounding as the woman approached. She stopped a few paces away, her gaze fixed on Seorin, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, without warning, she reached out and placed her hand on Seorin's chest, right over her heart. A surge of warmth flooded through Seorin's body, and in that instant she understood. She was not entirely human. She never had been. She belonged to the forest, to the ancient magic that wove through the earth and sky. And now that magic was awakening. As the days stretched onward, Seorin felt the world shift beneath her feet, and with it, something inside her began to stir. It was faint at first, an unexplainable hum threading through her senses, like the soft vibration of a harp string played somewhere far away. It called to her in ways she could not understand, drawing her deeper into the forest with each passing day. At first, it felt like a secret only she could sense, hidden beneath the surface of the everyday world. The trees whispered with more clarity, their leaves swaying as if they knew her name. The birds that once sang cheerful melodies now watched her with solemn eyes. The wind carried unfamiliar scents, wildflowers blooming out of season, rain from distant skies, and a cool, earthy musk that seemed to emanate from the heart of the forest itself. Jiwoon noticed the change. He watched Seorin closely, his brows knitting together in concern as he saw her gaze drift into distant places he couldn't follow. She moved as though she were tethered to something beyond the world they knew. She still laughed when he teased her, and still ran beside him as they raced through meadows. But her laughter was softer now, almost hesitant, as though she wasn't sure where it belonged anymore. Despite the growing unease, they kept exploring the forest together, retracing their favorite trails and returning to the glade that had always felt like home. Yet, even the glade had changed. The light no longer shimmered with warmth. Instead, it flickered like the last embers of a dying flame. The once vivid flowers drooped under the weight of unseen sorrow, and the stream, which had always babbled happily over moss-covered stones, now murmured in low, mournful tones. Seorin knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how to explain it, not to Jiwoon, not even to herself. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a great chasm, teetering on the brink of something vast and unknowable. And at night, when she closed her eyes, the dreams came. In her dreams, she wandered through the forest, guided by a figure cloaked in silver light. The figure led her through ancient groves and across glistening streams until they reached a place unlike any Seorin had ever seen. There, beneath the boughs of an enormous tree whose roots stretched deep into the earth, the figure would place a hand over Soren's heart, and a soft glow would spread through her chest. Each time Seorin awoke from the dream, her heartbeat felt heavier, as though it carried the weight of 1,000 forgotten memories. The dreams were both comforting and terrifying, a glimpse of something she couldn't yet understand, but that seemed to be drawing her closer with every breath. One night, unable to sleep, Seorin slipped out of her house and walked into the forest. The village was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, and the trees swayed gently in the cool night breeze. Her footsteps were light against the forest floor as she followed the familiar path to the glade. She moved without hesitation, as though her body knew the way, even when her mind was lost in a haze of questions. As she approached the clearing, she noticed that the air had changed. It no longer smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. Instead, it carried the faint scent of something ancient and powerful, like lightning before a storm. When she stepped into the glade, she stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The glade was no longer shrouded in gray. A soft, golden light bathed the clearing, illuminating every blade of grass and every petal on the withered flowers. The ancient tree in the center of the glade seemed to pulse with life, its branches stretching skyward as though reaching for the stars. And beneath its boughs stood the figure from Seorin's dreams. The figure was tall and regal, her hair flowing like liquid silver, and her eyes glowing with a light that seemed to hold all the secrets of the universe. Her presence was overwhelming, filling the air with a quiet power that made Seorin feel both small and infinite at the same time. Seorin took a step forward, drawn by an invisible force, and as she moved closer, she felt the hum inside her grow stronger, resonating with the pulse of the glade. The figure raised a hand and placed it gently over Soren's heart, and in that moment everything changed. Memories flooded Soren's mind, memories that didn't belong to her but felt as familiar as her own heartbeat. She saw glimpses of a time long past when the world was young and filled with magic. She saw the forest as it had once been, vibrant and alive, teeming with creatures that shimmered with otherworldly light. And she saw herself, not as the girl she had always known, but as something older, something eternal, something that had been lost and was now found. The vision shifted, and Saren saw herself standing at the edge of a great battle. The sky was dark, and the air was thick with smoke and the sound of clashing swords. She was not afraid. She stood tall, her eyes blazing with fierce determination, as she faced an enemy cloaked in shadows. Around her, warriors fought with blades of fire and shields made of starlight, and at her side stood a figure with bright, familiar eyes, eyes that belonged to Jiwoon. The vision faded, and Siren found herself back in the glade, her knees trembling and her heart racing. The figure before her lowered her hand and stepped back, her gaze filled with a quiet sorrow. And then, without a sound, she vanished, leaving Siren alone beneath the ancient tree. Siren stood in the clearing for a long time, her mind reeling from what she had seen. The weight of the vision pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to run, to escape the forest and the memories that threatened to consume her, but she knew there was no turning back. When she finally stepped out of the glade, she found Jiwoon waiting for her at the edge of the forest. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear and confusion. He had seen the golden light and followed it, hoping to find Siren before it was too late. They walked back to the village in silence, their footsteps echoing through the quiet night. Siren could feel Jiwoon's gaze on her, filled with questions he didn't know how to ask. But she had no answers to give him. Not yet. All she knew was that something had awakened inside her, and it was only the beginning. The days after Sioran's awakening felt like a blur, a whirlwind of sensations, visions, and emotions that she struggled to contain. The quiet hum beneath her skin had grown louder, almost deafening, as though the very air around her was vibrating with unseen energy. The world, once familiar and comforting, now seemed strange and full of secrets. Every shadow held a mystery, every gust of wind carried a whisper of ancient knowledge, and every tree seemed to lean closer, as if eager to share forgotten truths. Seorin spent hours wandering the forest, drawn deeper into its tangled heart by a force she couldn't resist. The paths she once knew so well now shifted and twisted before her eyes, leading her to places she had never seen before. She found hidden groves where golden flowers bloomed beneath silver leaves and clear pools where the water shimmered with a soft inner light. She saw creatures that defied explanation. Birds with feathers like molten gold, humped deer with antlers made of crystal, and tiny, glowing beings that flitted through the air like living sparks. Each discovery filled Saren with a strange mixture of wonder and dread. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a vast ocean, its dark, churning depths calling to her with a voice that was both beautiful and terrifying. And always, in the back of her mind, she felt the presence of the silver-haired woman, the guardian of the ancient glade, watching her from the shadows. Jiwoon too felt the pull of the forest, though in a different way. He had always been attuned to the natural world, but now it was as if the forest itself was speaking to him, urging him to protect Seorin from the danger that seemed to be closing in around them. He followed her whenever he could, staying close but never interfering, his heart heavy with unspoken fears. He could see the change in her, and it frightened him. Soren had always been brave and curious, but now there was something otherworldly about her, a quiet, luminous strength that made her seem distant, as though part of her no longer belonged to the human world. One afternoon, as they wandered through the woods, they came upon a crumbling stone archway hidden beneath a curtain of ivy. The archway seemed ancient, its surface etched with strange, swirling symbols that glowed faintly in the dappled sunlight. Beyond it lay a narrow path, winding through a dense thicket of thorny bushes. Without a word, Soren stepped through the archway, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Jiwoon hesitated for a moment before following her. As he passed beneath the arch, he felt a strange tingling sensation, as though he were crossing an invisible threshold. The air on the other side was cooler and heavier, filled with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. The path led them deep into the forest, past ancient trees whose gnarled roots twisted like the coils of sleeping serpents. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a wide clearing, where the ruins of an ancient temple rose from the moss-covered ground. The temple was half hidden beneath a canopy of vines, its stone walls cracked and weathered by time. At its center stood a towering stone statue of a woman with outstretched arms, her face serene and her eyes closed in eternal slumber. As Seorin approached the statue, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. A soft golden light emanated from the statue's chest, growing brighter with each passing moment. Seorin reached out, her fingers brushing against the stone, and in that instant, the world seemed to dissolve around her. She found herself standing in a vast, sunlit field, surrounded by towering mountains and endless skies. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the grass beneath her feet was soft and warm. In the distance, she could see a group of figures approaching, their forms shimmering like mirages in the heat of the afternoon sun. As they drew closer, Saren realized that they were not human. They were tall and graceful, with eyes that glowed like molten gold and wings that shimmered with iridescent light. They wore robes of deep blue and silver, and their faces were calm and wise, as though they had seen the rise and fall of countless worlds. One of the figures stepped forward, holding a staff carved from a single piece of crystal. He raised his hand, and a soft, melodic voice echoed in Seorin's mind, speaking a language she had never heard but somehow understood. The vision shifted, and Seorin found herself standing at the edge of a great battlefield. The sky was dark and filled with swirling clouds, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and blood. In the distance, she could see the shadowy figure from her earlier vision, the enemy she had faced in another life, standing atop a hill, his cloak billowing in the wind. His eyes glowed red with malice, and his lips curled into a cruel smile as he raised a sword wreathed in black flames. Seorin felt a surge of fear, but she did not run. She stood her ground, her heart racing as she summoned the strength that had been sleeping inside her for so long. She raised her hand, and a beam of golden light shot from her palm, cutting through the darkness and striking the shadowy figure with a force that shook the earth. The vision faded, and Seorin found herself back in the temple, her chest heaving and her skin damp with sweat. Jiwoon was at her side, his face pale and his eyes wide with concern. He had seen the golden light and felt the tremors, but he didn't know what had happened to Seorin or how to help her. They left the temple in silence, their minds heavy with unanswered questions. Seorin could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her, pulling her toward a fate she could not escape. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew that the path she had chosen was one she could not walk alone. As they made their way back through the forest, Seorin reached for Jiwoon's hand. He squeezed her fingers gently, his touch warm and reassuring, and in that moment, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Seorin and Jiwoon walked back from the ancient temple, their footsteps light on the mossy path. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken knowledge that the peace they had once known was slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. The ancient magic that pulsed beneath the earth had awakened, and with it, a force that was both beautiful and terrifying. As the days passed, Seorin's powers grew stronger. She could feel the magic flowing through her veins like liquid fire, guiding her movements and filling her mind with visions of the past and glimpses of the future. She could sense the emotions of the forest creatures, hear the whispers of the wind, and even command the very roots of the trees to twist and turn at her will. But with this newfound power came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She was no longer just a girl. She was a guardian, a protector of the ancient magic that had kept the balance between worlds for centuries. Jiwoon, too, had changed. Though he had no magic of his own, he had become stronger, faster, and more attuned to the rhythms of the forest. He trained tirelessly, honing his skills with the dagger they had found in the ancient chest. He knew that Soren's powers made her a target, and he was determined to protect her, no matter the cost. Their bond, once simple and carefree, had deepened into something unbreakable, a love forged in the crucible of destiny. One misty morning, as they stood on the edge of the glade, a strange sound broke the stillness. It was a low, rumbling growl, followed by the rustling of leaves and the snap of breaking branches. Soren and Jiwoon turned toward the sound, their senses on high alert. From the shadows of the forest, a group of dark, twisted creatures emerged. They were unlike anything Soren had ever seen. Hulking beasts with scales like blackened armor, eyes that glowed with malevolent light, and claws that gleamed like obsidian. The creatures circled the glade, their growls growing louder as they closed in. Seorin could feel the dark magic that pulsed through their bodies, a poisonous, corrupted force that sought to consume everything in its path. She knew, instinctively, that they were emissaries of the shadowy figure from her visions, the ancient enemy who sought to claim the forest's magic for himself. Seorin stepped forward, her heart steady despite the fear that coiled in her chest. She raised her hand, and golden light erupted from her palm, illuminating the glade and driving back the shadows. The creatures hissed and recoiled, but they did not retreat. They were here for a purpose, and they would not be easily deterred. Jiwoon drew his dagger and positioned himself at Seorin's side, his eyes locked on the nearest creature. He could feel the tension in her body, the raw power that was building beneath her skin, and he knew that this battle would be unlike any they had faced before. The first creature lunged, its claws aimed at Seorin's chest. She dodged with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, spinning away and sending a beam of golden light crashing into its side. The creature howled in pain, but before it could recover, Jiwoon was upon it, his dagger flashing in the sunlight as he struck with precision and speed. The battle raged on, a blur of light and shadow, of steel and magic. Seorin fought with a fierceness that surprised even herself, her movements guided by the ancient power that flowed through her veins. She summoned roots from the earth to entangle the creatures, called down beams of light to shatter their armor, and created shimmering barriers to protect Jiwoon from their deadly claws. But the creatures were relentless, and for every one they defeated, another seemed to rise from the shadows. Seorin could feel her strength waning, the magic within her flickering like a dying flame. She knew that they could not hold out much longer. In that moment of desperation, a vision flashed before Seorin's eyes, a vision of the ancient guardian, the silver-haired woman who had awakened her powers. She stood at the center of the glade, her arms raised and her eyes blazing with light. And in her mind, Seorin heard a single echoing command: remember who you are. The words ignited something deep within Seorin, a memory, a truth that had been buried beneath layers of fear and doubt. She was not just a guardian. She was the chosen heir of the ancient magic, the last descendant of the forest's first protectors. And with that realization came a surge of power unlike anything she had ever felt before. Golden light erupted from Seorin's body, spreading outward in a blinding wave that swept through the glade, banishing the darkness and reducing the creatures to ashes. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, the forest was bathed in a soft golden glow, as though the very earth was rejoicing in Seorin's awakening. When the light finally faded, Sorin sank to her knees, her chest heaving and her skin damp with sweat. Jiwoon was at her side in an instant, his arms wrapping around her as he whispered words of comfort. She leaned into him, her heart racing as she tried to process what had just happened. The forest was quiet now, the threat vanquished, but Sorin knew that their journey was far from over. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. The shadowy figure from her visions was still out there, waiting, and she could feel his presence like a dark cloud on the horizon. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She rested her head on Jiwoon's shoulder, their fingers entwined, and listened to the gentle rustling of the leaves and the distant song of a nightingale. In that quiet, magical moment, Sorin understood that her destiny was not a burden to be borne alone. She had Jiwoon by her side, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of amber and gold, Sorin and Jiwoon stood at the edge of the glade, gazing out at the world that awaited them. The path before them was uncertain, filled with danger and darkness, but it was also a path of hope, of love, and of endless possibilities. And as they took their first step into the unknown, hand in hand, Sorin felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. No matter what the future held, they would face it together. And together they would find the strength to protect the magic that bound them to each other, to the forest, and to the ancient, timeless song of the earth.